The America's Democrats podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to americasdemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. And if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. This is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. Had enough of Fox News, the House Freedom Caucus, and Donald Trump? If you want the facts that you won't get from them or from the fake news sites of the alt-right, then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. And we say hello to Wallace Mazon, advocacy lead with the Sunrise Movement. Wallace, thanks for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, our pleasure. So the Sunrise Movement recently launched a Good Jobs for All campaign. Why did you launch the campaign and why now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you don't know much about Sunrise, your listeners, Sunrise Movement is a youth movement working to stop climate change. We really believe that we need a Green New Deal to fight the climate crisis and put millions of people to work doing so. And that's why we launched the Good Jobs for All campaign. There are millions of Americans who are unemployed or underemployed, and our leaders have no plan to put people back to work as we slowly recover from COVID-19. And on top of that, the climate is rapidly changing around us, and we need people with good jobs to revolutionize our infrastructure and protect our cities and communities from climate devastation, as we saw this winter in Texas. That's the key example of how we are not prepared for the realities of climate change on our communities and infrastructure.
Yeah, Texas is a great example of how ugly it can get. Not to mention the oceans rising and everything else that's going on, temperature of the earth rising. And as you mentioned, the campaign focuses on the Green New Deal as a way to create good jobs. But what does good jobs mean within the context of this campaign?
Right. So, the jobs that we're talking about would be, more traditional climate jobs. But also includes jobs that help communities become more resilient, right? Also, jobs that are more on the care economy side of things, right? And these jobs would include good salaries and benefits, livable wages with full healthcare coverage, housing, healthcare, long-term career opportunities.
So, in terms, let's talk about some of the specific policies that need to be part of the Green New Deal if it is, in fact, to respond to the concerns of this campaign.
Right. So that's a good question. So specifically, there are three things on the top of my mind that would be good to support. One, Representative Ayanna Pressley actually introduced a federal jobs guarantee resolution in the House. So that's a really important thing. Obviously, that's part of the Green New Deal, federal jobs guarantee. So we would like our elected officials to support that. Two, the $2 trillion infrastructure plan that Biden introduced to the American public and spoke about during his joint address. A lot of it, if you heard it, he was talking about good jobs, using a lot of Sunrise's talking points about how we need to put people to work, fighting the climate crisis with good paying jobs. And some of the proposal in Biden's plan is, some's good, some's not as ambitious as we would like it to be, right? We don't think that $2 trillion is enough money to actually tackle the climate crisis at the scale. But at speed, this money is going out, between 8 and 10 years. People really need the money. We need to get that money out as fast as we can. What Sunrise wants is the Thrive Agenda, which calls for $10 trillion over the next decade. So $1 trillion each year fighting the climate crisis. And the third thing is the Civilian Climate Corps, which was wrote into executive action by the Biden administration during his first week. And AOC and Senator Ed Markey actually introduced a version of the Civilian Climate Corps. And this would put 1.5 million people to work fighting the climate crisis with the things I was telling you about, good salary and benefits, $15 an hour, right? Good union paying jobs, putting people to work fighting climate change. And we see this as the blueprint to the Green New Deal, right? The infrastructure package is the blueprint to the Green New Deal. And we see the CCC, the Civilian Climate Corps, as a blueprint to a federal jobs guarantee.
We're speaking to Wallace Mazon, advocacy lead with the Sunrise Movement. Now, you mentioned a couple, Ed Markey and AOC. In terms of strategy, though, who are some of your other existing allies in Congress?
Well, Bernie Sanders, a strong ally, the squad, obviously, right. And there's so many. Cory Bush just introduced the Green New Deal for cities with AOC in the House, right? So we see so many new ideas coming from Congress now since the Green New Deal has been introduced. But Sunrise has the saying, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, right? So we're willing to work with anyone who, is willing to, do what's right for their constituents and do what's right for our futures.
How daunting a task is that for you, though? Because there's been so much pushback from the right about, Green New Deal isn't, it's spending way too much money. And it's not. It's an investment in our future, of course. But how do you balance that?
Sometimes you just tell the truth. I mean, right? We see what science is saying. We even see some Republicans saying that climate change is real. So, what are we going to do? Are we going to continue to not act? Are we going to continue to see our communities burn? We're going to continue to see our infrastructure fail? Or are we going to step up to the plate and we're going to actually invest in our communities? Like you said, this is an investment in people, right? This is an investment in our communities and our cities. So if, the Republicans always talk about bipartisanship, but fighting for our communities, fighting for our children, that's bipartisan. And if they want to work with us, we're willing to do that.
What about labor unions, Wally? Are they working with you on this campaign?
Yeah, so CWI and IUPAT are original pledge signers to the Good Jobs for All campaign. And we also work with the Green New Deal Network, which SEIU is a part of. So, they know what we have to face and they want to be a part of the solution. And also, Sunrise is a big supporter of the PRO Act, which would make it easier for people to unionize. And, I'm from Florida, which is a right to work state. And the state government has done a great job of making it so difficult for people to unionize and fight for livable wages. And if you saw in the news a couple of days ago, the coal miners in West Virginia wanted to be a part of a just transition because they see the problems of climate change and they want to be a part of solutions.
And it's something. So you brought up coal miners, and there's such an obvious transition where programs can be developed that will train people that are in one particular field, coal, and so that they can learn another type of energy related service. It could be solar, it could be water, wind energy, anything. I mean, it's not a loss of jobs, it's just recreating jobs, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, I don't know too much about, coal miners, but I do know about good wages and I do know about good jobs. And, people know about science and they see what climate change is doing to their community. So I'm really happy that, they decided to, want to be a part of these conversations, because when we talk about a just transition, it can't be just if they're not a part of the conversation, right? So hopefully, we can have those conversations and we can make this truly a just transition.
Obviously, more members of Congress need to be won over, and you're asking the public to send a pledge to the representatives. What are some of the specific elements of the pledge, and what kind of response have you seen since you launched the campaign back in early March?
Right. So we're asking our representatives to support Good Jobs for All, just saying that, they'll support legislation like the CCC that will put people to work fighting climate change, and just a little step towards our goal of a federal jobs guarantee, which is a step to the Green New Deal. And since we launched, we've seen positive reviews from certain members of Congress. They've signed on. There hasn't been any arm twisting or anything like that, because they believe in the stuff that we're doing. And some members of Congress we have had to have some difficult conversations with, but that's what democracy is, right? We have to continue to do the work. We have to continue to ask our elected officials to do what their constituents want, because it's what the community needs.
Absolutely. Now, as you mentioned, the Sunrise Movement is a youth-led political movement. Do you feel that young Americans overall, the vast majority of young Americans, are they ready to focus their energy on a jobs program?
I think so. What we've been seeing, out in the world is that, like, one, people are coming out of college with a lot of student debt, right? Two, people are coming out of college with degrees and they have jobs that, they don't find fulfilling. And another thing is that, they might be coming out of college, with an underpaying job. And these are people just in college. We're not even talking about people who, decided to do a trade or something like that, So I think people are really focused on jobs. People want meaningful work that will, provide for their families. I think that's one of the most important things. So I think that, young people especially, are focused on that, and they're definitely focused on climate change, because, if we don't get a handle on that, it's game over for all of us. So why not have a good paying job fighting climate change?
Absolutely. Wallace Mazon, advocacy lead with the Sunrise Movement. If you want to learn more about them, by the way, you can check them out at sunrisemovement.org. Wally, appreciate your time with us today, and wish you the best of luck, and would love to hear how you're doing down the road sometime.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
What's the most damning thing about America's healthcare system? The system. While our doctors, nurses, and technicians are among the best in the world, the system itself is not even designed for care, but for the constant expansion of profits for insurance giants, drug makers, hospital chains, system managers, financiers, and other voracious components of the medical industry. For starters, ponder that term, medical industry. The ethical essence of healthcare is that it's a human right, essential to every person and to the common good. But corporate elites now claim to own our health by shriveling the concept of care to just another product available to those who can pay whatever monopolistic industrialists demand. But this rationing of care meant the industry was leaving a mass market of millions of patients untapped. So industry bean counters made a critical adjustment. Lower prices? Don't get silly. Instead, the system is pushing medical debt as the ticket to care. So you come in sick or injured, scared, dazed, and suddenly you're hooked up to a long-term medical payment plan. A recent survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation revealed that more than 100 million Americans, including 41% of all adults, are in hock because of the skyrocketing costs of the so-called care industry. This includes debt that patients owe directly to the system, plus money borrowed from family or friends or put on credit cards. An analysis in 2019 estimated that families were being hit with at least $195 billion in payments for medical borrowing, a number driven dramatically higher since the pandemic. As one doctor angrily said of industrial health care, debt is no longer just a bug in our system, it is one of the main products. We have a healthcare system almost perfectly designed to create debt. This is Jim Hightower saying, how sick is that?
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. And we say hello to Joseph Uehlein as the founding president of the Labor Network for Sustainability and Voices for a Sustainable Future. Joe Uehlein, thank you so much for joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be talking to you today.
And our pleasure to have you with us. There's a conversation being put out there, and I'll point out mostly by the fossil fuel industry, that says supporting the Green New Deal pits politicians against potential working class voters. Is there any truth to that?
No. And I know it is a fossil fuel industry talking point, and sadly, they have close relationships with a number of fossil fuel unions. So the talking points get transmitted beyond the industry itself to their allies, and that's what helps give these talking points some feet. But no, it's a scare tactic. It's not new. This has been used in the past around climate issues and other related things.
There was some opposition to the Green New Deal early on from unions. Where do unions stand now?
Well, there's been a lot of local unions and labor councils that have endorsed the Green New Deal, all in many in different ways. So I kind of say they've endorsed a Green New Deal. Some have endorsed the Green New Deal, but others it's a variation on the Green New Deal. But that's okay. It's all building toward a common outcome. But nationally, there's probably only one or two unions that have endorsed the Green New Deal. So that's been, kind of static over the last few months. But SEIU, obviously a big union, endorsed it over the summer, and as did the American Association of Flight Attendants.
Do you get the feeling that others will come around?
Oh, I do, definitely. When you look at the objection early on to the Green New Deal, it was, there were several, they said, well, we weren't consulted. And that's kind of a, I don't know, it reflects weakness for starters. I don't think it's a good talking point for them, but the truth is they were consulted, so it's not even an accurate objection. But anyway, that's what they said. We weren't consulted. And secondly, it's short on specifics. Well, that's kind of the whole idea with a resolution. That resolution provides a framework through which a lot of specifics can be built out, added to and built out. And the irony in that is that there was a move to create a special committee to do just that, to hold hearings on the Green New Deal and fill in all the specifics. And many of the groups, unions included, who complained that it was short on specifics, opposed the creation of that committee. So there is some gamesmanship that's very common in Washington. They're all expert at it, and that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, your organization, the Labor Network for Sustainability, recently released a paper titled "No Worker Left Behind: Protecting Workers and Communities in the Green New Deal." And it looks at a variety of plans for a Green New Deal and how they allow for a just transition. For starters, what does just transition mean?
What it means is that no worker or community who through no fault of their own are going to be damaged by changes that are either needed on a societal level or required through law, say to address the climate crisis, that they should not pay the price. They should not be the ones who suffer. So the concept of just transition is just that working people and communities need to be made whole when these changes take place.
Now, we can't go into the details of all the plans covered in the report, but as you look across them, what are some of the key provisions that you see that would justify support from labor unions?
Well, I think the most important provision that would justify support from unions is that we believe in and call for a 5-year maintenance of income and benefits provision, which means if you're a worker in an oil refinery and you're making $100,000 a year and you have pension benefits and health care, which is standard in unionized refineries, and that refinery shuts down, you get that for 5 years. At the same time, there'll be training and other kinds of job placement and so on, but you get that for 5 years. So you have a cushion with which to adjust your life in a way that you're kind of being forced to do.
Interesting. We're speaking with Joe Uehlein, the founding president of the Labor Network for Sustainability and also Voices for a Sustainable Future. Joe, about a year ago, you wrote a piece for In These Times titled 12 Reasons Labor Should Demand a Green New Deal. In it, you wrote about Roosevelt's New Deal. What can the Green New Deal learn from the New Deal when it comes to protecting workers?
Well, it can learn a lot. I mean, the New Deal put into place a system of labor management relations that worked, for quite a while. I mean, it helped build the modern labor movement, but it also fell apart, and it was amended several times and weakened several times, and that accompanied by a corporate strategy to break the law, purposefully break the law, that all needs to be fixed. So a new Green New Deal could fix the weaknesses in the original New Deal law, the National Labor Relations Act.
You know, and one of the more powerful reasons you give for why labor should demand a Green New Deal is that it has the power to rebuild the labor movement. How do you see that happen?
Yeah. Well, the way that happens is if we can get the Green New Deal, become in bits and pieces, but enacted into law, there will be millions of jobs created. And this is the greatest organizing opportunity that the labor movement has seen since the original New Deal. We'll be building a 100% renewable electric system, a new smart grid, retrofitting all the buildings, starting with government buildings, industrial buildings, going to all residential buildings, reconstructing how we manufacture, how we do agriculture. These are all going to be transportation, completely has to be re-envisioned and imagined and put into place. And we have the opportunity to do it in a way where equity and worker justice is centered in all of this. And when you look at that job creation potential coupled with the Green New Deal's assertion of a living wage for every person who wants a guaranteed job. So that's central. There's a federal jobs guarantee in the Green New Deal and jobs at a living wage. Now, I would say family supporting wage. And when the time comes to testify, that's what we'll be fighting for. But the guaranteed job is important because it's the best way to shrink the labor market, which forces wages and benefits up across the board and enables unions to do what they do best, which means negotiate good contracts. So this is a huge opportunity for organized labor.
Now, you also write that the Green New Deal has the potential to unite the working class. How would that work, or is that really what you were just describing in the previous question?
Yeah, it's a bit of that, but there's more to it. So the equity issue is central. It has to be central right along with economic justice, which means we have to do everything within our power through this Green New Deal to sort of enable racism and sexism and other kinds of discrimination to fade into the past. We build equity into the job creation. We provide ladders out of poverty. For example, for people who could never aspire to get into a good union apprenticeship program or job training program, we have the opportunity to provide them a way of doing that, of getting into and that's central to all of this. So we want to even everything out and do away with the sort of cultural competition that you sometimes find in these programs and in society. That can be addressed in this Green New Deal.
Now, as we move forward in this election season, do you have a sense that Democrats see the necessity of linking together the two issues of climate change and economic justice for workers?
I think so. We're hearing it a lot from most of the Democratic candidates, and some of them are very strong on it, like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They're the strongest. But even others, I mean, we're not hearing a lot from Joe Biden about it, a little bit, but there are, some newcomers to this thing, like Michael Bloomberg, and, he had a good labor record in the city of New York, and he's certainly done his thing on climate, so he might start talking about this. I don't know that he will. I don't know that much about him, but it is on the debate stage, and it is in all the, it was in Iowa, New Hampshire, going forward. They're talking about this stuff.
And it's about time. I mean,
Yeah.
really, it's about time. Joe Uehlein, founding president of the Labor Network for Sustainability and Voices for a Sustainable Future, joining us today on the America's Democrats podcast. Joe, we appreciate your time with us. Would love to have you back again soon.
Sure, I'd be happy to come back. Just let me know.
Great. Thanks very much. And this is the America's Democrats podcast, the weekly podcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
Let's begin with Dr. Robert J. Lifton. At the age of 96, he's one of the most prominent psychiatrists in America. He's also one of the originators of the field of psychohistory, which is the study of psychological motivations for war, terrorism, and genocide.
My own work on extremism, on efforts at reality control, or what I call the ownership of reality. This work had direct bearing on Trump. I emphasize what I call malignant normality. That is a normality that's imposed upon a group, as in Nazi Germany, that can be devastating and murderous and is presented as normal. I'm not saying that Trump or his followers are Nazis, but they create their own malignant normality.
Now, the danger of such malignant normality, of course, is that it pervades society to such an extent that we come to accept it as the new normal. That's the warning expressed by Dr. Leonard Glass, psychiatrist on the faculty of the Harvard Medical School.
It is a malignant pseudo-normality, and some segments of our population are so hungry for a champion, someone who will authentically know everything and do everything, be the only one. It's so seductive, and it reminds you of other tyrannical leaders who succeeded in having mass appeal. And there's a kind of suspension of critical thinking on the part of the population who gets sort of swept up in an allegiance. It's as though you're following a baseball team or the Dallas Cowboys, and you don't care if your player plays by the rules or not. He's your player. That's what matters.
And this added comment by Dr. Bandy Lee, editor of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump and psychiatrist on the faculty of the Yale Medical School.
What is most important to point out, perhaps, is the difference between normality and abnormality. Because the abnormal, when it takes over, just like a pandemic, it can engulf our normal affairs. It can absorb and subsume institutions and entire segments of the population. To believe that mental symptoms are not contagious is, in fact, a fantasy when they do not even require physical exposure to become contagious. And pathological symptoms are far more contagious. And so there's often even an overturning of reality where the normal becomes abnormal, what's good becomes bad, and what used to be unacceptable is now what we all accept.
It's important to note that these psychiatrists are not diagnosing Donald Trump nor pretending to. They are instead describing his behavior and warning us that his behavior is dangerous. Well, let's look at some of their observations about the mental stability of Donald Trump, starting with his focus on himself above all others. You may have heard that described as narcissism, but renowned Harvard psychiatrist Dr. Robert J. Lifton says it's actually a lot worse than that.
Trump's approach to reality is what I call solipsistic. That's a little different from narcissistic. He's got plenty of that, of course. But solipsistic simply means self-contained. His only reality is the reality of the self, what it experiences and what it needs. I can say one more thing about reality. It's a term that's tossed about quite a bit. There are two kinds of reality. It's been studied over the ages, and it's hard to define. One is the more general reality that can be large visions and principles, such as the belief that democracy is the best or not the best form of government, or that God exists or does not. But the other is an immediate factual reality. I'm talking to you in a podcast today at this moment. That's an immediate factual reality. And when the president of a powerful country like the United States lives in a denial and rejection of factual reality, that country is in trouble. And in order to reclaim reality, one must expose that solipsistic reality for what it is and its dangers.
So Trump's psychological deficits prevent him from seeing anything in the world beyond himself. If that's not enough to scare the hell out of you, wait, there's more. Trump's psychological deficits also make him a bully. Harvard psychiatrist Dr. Henry Friedman.
He's such a bully that he doesn't even attempt to hide it. And he wants to bully people to be in a position of inferiority to him. And I think it's got to do with maintaining the fact that he's the best. He's the most important person in the room, and he counts.
Psychologist Stephen Solz explains the origin of that bully behavior on the part of Donald Trump.
Bullies tend to be insecure. Using bullying as a way of dealing with that. It's changing it into its opposite. This is an incredibly insecure person, I think.
Dr. Solz is a clinical psychologist and director of the Social Justice and Human Rights Program at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis. He says that Trump gets something else out of being a bully.
It's also a merger of that with sadism. He gets pleasure in cruelty. He just exhibits in a way that most people in the public eye know enough not to do, that the pleasure that he gets in making people suffer, his mocking of reporters, the tweets are also part of the way of doing that.
So now we have at least one psychologist describe Trump as a sadist. But here's another term you don't often hear associated with Donald Trump: paranoid. Harvard psychiatrist Henry Friedman explains.
People have trouble understanding how to define what we call paranoia. People are more used to it in the delusional form of somebody thinks they're being followed by the FBI. But it has to do with seeing others as exaggeratedly hostile and dangerous to them. So when you look at something like his relationship to the press, or those unfortunate press conferences during the COVID conferences, and he would attack them mercilessly as if they were doing something rude or to him. He'd say, "You're so rude." And, he was the one being rude. You could see it. But you could also see the projection that they were really seen by him as dangerously attacking him, even when they were asking questions that were softball and weren't even so difficult at all. Tell me how you would comfort the people who have lost people in this pandemic. Paranoid mind sees danger all over the place and also needs to erect an enemy. In this case, with Trump, it's illegal immigrants, it's Mexicans, it's women, it's lots of groups that he can project his hatred onto. And the fact is, it's so evident, is that he's the hater. He's a man who's filled with hatreds and vitriolic denunciation of everyone in special names, but he's always seeing it as coming at him from groups that really don't bear him any hostility. The paranoid person cannot be moved away from his view of who the enemy is. This is particularly true when it comes to the next election, where his view that he is being in danger justifies for him doing whatever he does to skew the election or throw it out in his favor. And armed with Alan Dershowitz's argument, whatever the president does, if he thinks it's in the interest of the country, is constitutional, you can just see what kind of confluence of actions we have to anticipate. As a person who can use names to annihilate people, Sleepy Joe, etc., he obviously greatly fears anybody annihilating him, and he sees it in everything, and therefore, when Nancy Pelosi says, I pray for him, he says, oh, yeah, sure she does. If she prays for anything, it's for me to be dead. And, he is extremely sensitive because challenges to his power are so disconcerting to him, disorganizing, you might say. But I think he always manages to come back and negate it in the same way that any information that he doesn't believe in. In my chapter, I wrote about paranoid grandiosity, the combination of the two, because he is a powerful figure, but he has to constantly emphasize how great he is. And a grandiose paranoid character will continue to be grandiose paranoid and a character disorder and will wreak havoc.
If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook and Twitter, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.